Hey everybody, this is TJR. I wanted to do a follow-up to the video that I did a few weeks ago regarding the Universal Music Fire. Now, if you have not seen the original video, I recommend you watch that first. I also recommend that you read the New York Times article that broke this story as well, and I recommend you read it in full. Now, since the story broke, a couple of things have happened. Numerous artists, including Richard Carpenter of the Carpenters and singer-songwriter Bryan Adams, began to recount stories about how they requested copies of their masters from Universal Music Group in order to work on reissues, and how Universal Music Group played a long-running game of avoidance in trying to tell them why their masters could not be located. Richard Carpenter of the Carpenters said that he actually finally did get the truth out of them, but he had to beat it out of them. They did not want to tell him what had happened. Now, after the story broke, Universal Music Group released some statements stating that the article by the New York Times entitled "The Day the Music Burned" was not completely accurate. In an interview published last Monday on Billboard's website, Patrick Krause, UMG Senior Vice President of Recording Studios and Archive Management, asserted that many of the masters highlighted as destroyed we actually have in our archives, citing material by John Coltrane, Muddy Waters, and jazz pianist Ahmed Jamal. The article includes photographs provided by UMG, which appears to show boxes for a Coltrane master tape and the mono master of a Howlin' Wolf album. Now, to back up some of these claims, it's come out that after the fire, Universal Music Group formed a team referred to as Project Phoenix, and that the company launched a global hunt searching for what is referred to as safety copies, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and other duplicates of the master recordings. Randy Aronson, who at the time was UMG's Senior Director of Vault Operations, stated that the two-year project recovered copies of approximately 1/5 of what was lost. 1/5 of it. Now, earlier, I talked about safety copies and duplicates, so let me talk about that just a little bit. A safety copy, how do I describe this? Well, take the Beatles, for instance. They would record their album in the UK, and it would be released in the UK by Parlophone Records. Now, it's not cost efficient for Parlophone Records to manufacture copies and ship them to the United States. No, instead, they send what's called a safety master to America, to Capitol Records, who at the time was distributing their albums in the US, and Capitol Records then manufactures copies from that safety master to be released here in the United States. Now, what a safety master is it's a copy of the master. So it is one generation removed. Now, if you create a safety master and you create it carefully, you can probably very well likely create a very good safety master, one that has excellent sound quality and might be very hard to tell the difference between the original and the safety master. And by the way, we're very fortunate that the Beatles master tapes resided at Abbey Road Studios in London and not with Universal Music Group. But at the end of the day, a safety master is a dub down. It is not the original. And so is any duplicate by definition. As far as what I think about, Universal's statements that that the New York Times article was, overstating things and that a lot of what they said was destroyed actually wasn't destroyed. All I can think is, well, if that was the case, then why did they cover it up for all this time? Well, I would guess the reason is because if they mentioned, yeah, all these masters, these recordings were in here, but don't worry, we've got copies of all of them, many artists would be alarmed and say, well, then let me please see my masters. And then what happens if they can't produce them? Can Universal Music Group hold the fact that they own the masters over an artist's head when the masters are gone? They don't really own them. Does this mean now that the artist can do whatever they want? There's a whole bunch of questions, legal questions that I am, myself personally, not qualified to answer, but the questions are certainly there. Rick Beato in his coverage brought up some interesting questions. He gets blocked all the time by Universal Music Group for talking about a lot of songs that are owned by Universal Music Group. He has a series called What Makes This Song Great, where he plays the original recordings in order to discuss why he thinks these songs are great. And he gets blocked by Universal Music Group for doing this. And he asks, well, can they really do that now since they don't own the masters? So as predicted now, the lawsuits are happening. Howard King, an attorney representing several artists, sent a letter addressed to UMG CEO Lucien Grange, and hopefully I've said his last name right. If I didn't, I apologize, asking or demanding, depending on how you want to look at it, that UMG furnish him with a complete inventory of all master recordings, including finished songs, as well as outtakes that were destroyed in the fire. Now, of course, I would say that Universal Music Group is probably going to be very hesitant about handing over a complete list, since it might just tip off more artists to sue them. UMG CEO and Chairman Lucien Grange has issued an internal memo to Universal staffers, and this memo was obtained by Variety magazine, and that's why I can quote it here. In it, he acknowledged the vast damage caused by the fire. He does, of course, say that some media reports were not accurate, once again still holding to this idea that not everything is correct in this article. He does, however, go on to say, "Let me be clear, we owe our artists transparency. We owe them answers. I will ensure that the senior management of this company, starting with me, owns this." That's great, but they should have owned this back when it first happened. Now, in response to this, UMG has formed a 70-person team of archivists, recording engineers, producers, developers, and musicologists who are there to basically help answer responses from artists demanding to know if their masters are still safe. This includes 30 people from UMG and 40 people from Iron Mountain, the records management company that runs several vaults where Universal currently stores masters. Pat Krause, once again UMG's head of studio production and archive services, has stated that the team is responsible for timely and open responses to artists about the status of musical assets under our care, as well as the extent to which certain assets were lost. Of course, if you've read the New York Times article, it becomes apparent that Universal doesn't have a complete list and never will have a complete list. And there's going to be assets that were lost that we'll never ever know what they were, more than likely. When the fire first occurred and it was reported on the news, Universal Music Group basically said that the only thing lost was some video archives that they already had copies of. They did not mention any music, and they said that their losses were negligible. Now they're stating, of course, that yes, a lot of music was lost, but we have backup copies of this. And now maybe some of this is well-made digital copies of the original master tapes. But once again, these are still not the originals. There was a quote from Bent Montech of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers that was printed in the LA Times that sums this up beautifully. I did not quote it in the last video, but I did kind of paraphrase it. I want to quote it verbatim here. "The master recording is like a painting. When you stand in front of the original, you are standing there in the presence of the artist. You can take a photo of the painting, but no photo, regardless of how high the resolution might be, can truly capture what's in the original canvas." And I feel that about the master recordings, even if you make a high-quality digital copy off of that master recording. Another reason why Universal probably covered this up is because they ended up suing NBC Universal. And I'm not sure how that works. Are you kind of suing yourself? I don't know. But they sued them for not taking better care of the masters, for allowing the fire to happen. I don't know what the settlement was and what they got from that. But had artists known that their master recordings in there, they would have demanded a piece of that settlement. And it seems likely that many of them will now demand a piece of that settlement. Another YouTuber named Jarrett, who has a channel called Vinylize, recently also did a video about this topic. And in his video, he brought up the fact that he hopes that Warner Music Group and Sony Music Group, the other two big conglomerates that pretty much own most of what we refer to as popular music in the world, take a lesson from this and takes precautions to make sure that their masters are well protected and that the same thing doesn't happen to them. Now, normally when I get to the end of one of these videos, I would ask you, of course, to click like, click subscribe, all that stuff. But mostly, I would really appreciate it if you would share the original video that I did about this. And I would appreciate it if you would share any video by any other YouTube creator that is also covering this. Because quite frankly, I don't think there's been enough outrage about this. I don't think that enough people understand what has happened. I think another reason why Universal Music covered this up is because back then, I think people did care more about music and there would have been a lot more outrage over it. Now, I think people don't seem to care as much as long as they can pull it up on a streaming service. So what? They lost the master recording. I can listen to it here on Spotify. In fact, one of my motivations for doing a follow-up video is because I don't think enough people saw the original one. I remember Rick Beato also felt the same way, that not enough people watched his coverage of this, and that there just needs to be much more public awareness. And so he did a follow-up video too. So I would appreciate it if you'd share my original video. I would appreciate it if you'd share Rick Beato's video. And I would appreciate it if you would share the one that Vinyl Eyes just recently released, and any other videos that you find covering this topic. I said this in the previous video. I want to say this now. It bears repeating. If Universal Music Group does have backup copies, well, I hope they have really good ones. But you really can't say remastered from the original master tapes if you don't have them. And once again, I'm curious to know, has Universal Music Group released recordings since the fire stating from the original master tapes that were actually made from a backup or safety copy? This is TJR. Once again, everybody, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the last video. I really appreciated reading everybody's comments, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say here as well. But mostly, please, let's do whatever you can to get the word out. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Bye-bye.